Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about firearms and gun laws and why, in my opinion, they need to drastically change. Um, in this country, the Supreme Court recently made a decision that the Second Amendment, they affirmed the fact that the Second Amendment applies to individuals and is not confined to the National Guard. The whole concept of the militia at the time when the Constitution was written simply had to do with the gathering of the people in that particular area. And so when they talk about a well-regulated militia, what they're talking about is just the general citizenry that would make up that militia if and when, it was deemed appropriate. I'm glad that that has happened because for years and years there has been this mythological notion that somehow gun control laws have some kind of effect in terms of lowering the crime rate, even though there's no empirical evidence to support that notion. If we look at Chicago over the last 40 years, for example, in 1968, there was a law passed that banned the sale of handguns and handgun ammunition within the city limits of Chicago. In 1982, a law was passed that banned the possession of handguns in the city of Chicago. And in 1994, a law was passed that banned the possession of so-called assault rifles in the city of Chicago. Therefore, in 2008, 40 years after the first handgun ban was passed, we ought to be significantly safer now than we were 40 years ago, right? Wrong. And everybody knows it's wrong. The gun laws have not prevented the criminal element from getting guns at all. They are shooting each other up and shooting up half of everybody else on a regular, continuous basis, on a daily basis. Gun laws have not stopped criminals from getting guns to any significant degree. What the gun laws have done are two major things. One, they have disarmed the general citizenry. The average Joe Blow that goes to work, goes home, and minds his own business and tries to take care of his family, he is the one who's affected by these gun laws. These single parents are the ones who are affected by these gun laws. These women who are at home by themselves, it's just them or just them and their children. They're the ones who are negatively affected by these gun laws, not the criminals, because the criminals find a way to get guns anyway. Gun laws have not stopped criminals from getting guns at all. What they have done is stop the average citizen from being able to get a gun, because that average citizen is a law-abiding citizen and wants to obey the law. Is either wants to comply with the law and or is afraid to go to jail if they break the law. And so as a result, they comply with the law and allow themselves to be disarmed. I will never forget, as long as I live, this incident took place somewhere around 1983 or 84. This was on, I believe it was 84th and Manistee, or somewhere in that general area, where this elderly lady calls 911 to report someone is breaking in her home. And the 911 operator tells her to stay on the phone and continue to talk to them. Don't hang the phone up. The police are on their way. And you actually hear this woman being killed on the 911 phone call. And by the time the police got there, the criminals were gone. And so this is what the city of Chicago is suggesting that we do to protect ourselves. That we call 911 and stay on the phone, which is exactly what this woman did, and it cost her her life. Had that woman been in a position to defend herself, she might very well still be alive. But the fact that the law prevented her from defending herself is the reason that she's dead. As far as I'm concerned, the law is complicit in her death, because it did not legally offer her the opportunity to defend herself. I remember a situation, I believe this was in 1998 or 1999, where there was an elderly woman in her 90s. I believe she was like 92 or 93, something like that. Elderly woman in her 90s, wheelchair bound, but still living at home independently on her own. A couple of thugs break into her house. These guys are 16 years old. Break into her house. They knew she was, wheelchair bound, stuff like this. Break into her house, and they're ransacking the house, pushing around in a wheelchair from room to room, telling her, to tell us where the valuables are. At one point, I guess they feel it's safe because she's wheelchair bound. They leave her in the room by herself, and go to ransack other parts of the house. Well, because she's by herself, she rolls over to, you know, a drawer or whatever and pulls her gun out. And when they came back to the room where she was, she told them to get out of the house. And they threatened her and, oh, you ain't gonna shoot, blah, 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 blah. And she shot one of them little morons and killed them. All right? Of course, the other little coward runs immediately. Next thing you know, the gang has a hit out on a 92-year-old woman because she shot my boy. All right? This kind of foolishness. All right? And so, unfortunately, fortunately for her, the case was ruled justifiable homicide, and so she was not charged with the shooting. However, because she had violated Chicago's handgun law, they confiscated her handgun. So now she has to stay in her home, being threatened with death by these gangbangers, unarmed. And as a result, she ended up losing her independence. Her children had to come and get her and move her out of the home and so forth and so on. And so her whole life was ruined, in large part because she was prevented from defending herself. If we look at the two major killers you've had here in Illinois, January and February. January, you had a massacre out at the Lane Bryant store in Tinley Park. 5 women are shot, 6 women are shot, 5 women killed, 1 of them survived, and the perpetrator, of course, gets away. That was in January. In February, February 14th, on Valentine's Day, you have the Northern Illinois University massacre, where 5 people are killed and 21 people are injured. Now, if you look at each of these cases, as is the case in most deranged gunman massacres, the police had excellent response time. In both cases, the police arrived on the scene somewhere. The police arrived on the scene between 5 to 7 minutes from the time that they got the call, which is pretty good police response time. Unfortunately, as is the case in most deranged gunman massacres, by the time the police got there, all the damage is already done. In the case of the Tinley Park killings, the perpetrator got away. In the case of the Northern Illinois University killings, the perpetrator kills himself, as is the case in most of these deranged gunman massacres. Most of these deranged gunmen have no intentions of coming home when they leave that morning. All right? I mean, and this has happened over and over and over again, whether we're talking about the Columbine killings, whether we're talking about the guy that takes the AK-47 in the mall, whether we're talking about, I mean, there's just been a number of the killing up at Northern Illinois University, whether we're talking about the one at Virginia Tech last year. Most of these perpetrators of deranged gunman massacres have no intentions of ever coming back home alive when they leave that morning. And so the whole idea that we're going to rely on the police to protect us is, frankly, idiotic. It is not possible. I asked a question to members of the audience: who, besides one of those women in Tinley Park that was killed in Lane Bryant, who besides them would have been in a position to stop that massacre? Who among the students at Northern Illinois University would have been in a position to stop that massacre besides one of the intended victims? And the answer is none of them. All right? If one of those intended victims had not been in a position to stop that massacre, there was nothing to stop it. Even though the police had excellent response time, they got there too late, as is the case most of the time. Now, what you will find is back in prior to 1987, let's go back to 1986, there were only 8 states in the United States that had concealed carry laws. Florida became the first state, starting in 1987, to start what became known as the shall issue movement, where state governments were required to issue a concealed carry permit to anyone who applied, as long as they did not have a criminal background or a history of mental illness.